Welcome to Club Geneva. I'm your host, Shay, and tonight we're diving into questions that strike at the heart of Black identity, history, and progress. Does Black leadership still exist? Well, to truly grapple with this question, we have to take a step back and explore the history of Black leadership in America. From the abolitionist movements led by figures like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, to the civil rights era defined by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and Ella Baker, Black leadership has always been a beacon of resilience and change. These leaders emerged from a context of systematic oppression, fighting for freedom, dignity, and equality in a society determined to silence them. But let's not romanticize the past. Black leadership has always faced internal and external struggles. COINTELPRO, infighting within movements, and overwhelming weight of systematic racism. Well, it's no wonder that today some ask if the legacy of leadership still endures. Here's something to consider. Research has shown a decline on how many Black Americans feel regarding Black leadership. These patterns tend to speak to the notion that Black leadership does not represent their community's interest. This reflects a growing divide between grassroots movements and institutional power. At the same time, we see trailblazers like Stacey Abrams, Ketanji Brown Jackson, and even younger voices like Amanda Gorman, redefining what leadership looks like. So what's changed? Is leadership shifting away from traditional hierarchies towards decentralized movements like Black Lives Matter, which lacks a singular figurehead? Or is this a sign that leadership is faltering in the face of systematic challenges? Tonight, we'll explore arguments on both sides of the debate. Some argue that modern Black leadership is fragmented and diluted by celebrity culture and tokenism. Others contend that leadership has evolved, becoming more inclusive and reflective of diverse experiences within the Black community. We'll also dive into challenges Black leaders face today, from the lack of generational wealth to fund their efforts, to the constant scrutiny and double standards imposed by mainstream society. And we want to hear from you. So email us at clb.geneva@gmail.com with your thoughts or personal experiences with Black leadership. So who are our leaders today? Are they effective? And if Black leadership still exists, what does it look like in 2024 and beyond? Stay tuned as we unpack the evolution, challenges, and the future of Black leadership. This is Club Geneva, where history meets the present and the conversations move us forward. Here's the fundamental question we need to consider. Is Black leadership even necessary in today's world? Some argue that in a society striving for equity, leadership shouldn't be tied to race. Others counter that systematic barriers persist, requiring leaders who can uniquely advocate for the Black experience. Let's dig into this by examining policies often touted as solutions. Policies like diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI initiatives, and affirmative action. On the surface, these policies were designed to level the playing field. Affirmative action was once heralded as a tool to combat systematic inequalities. Similarly, DEI programs emerged in corporate and institutional spaces to promote inclusion and representation. Yet the impact of initiatives has been mixed, to say the least. While 78% of companies in the United States have some form of DEI programs, only 33% of Black employees feel these initiatives have positively impacted their work experience. Many argue that DEI often becomes performative, focusing on optics like token hires or surface-level diversity training, rather than dismantling the structural inequities. Many argue that DEI often becomes performative, focusing on optics like token hires or surface-level diversity training, rather than dismantling structural inequities. Affirmative action has faced similar criticisms and setbacks. In 2023, the Supreme Court effectively struck down the race-based admissions policies in higher education, a decision many saw as a direct assault on the progress achieved over decades. The fallout has been swift, with universities like Harvard and UNC already seeing a drop in Black and Latino admissions. But here's the kicker. When these policies fail or are dismantled entirely, who steps in to advocate for the Black community? This brings us back to the necessity of Black leadership. Critics of Black leadership argue that we're in a post-racial society where individual merit should outweigh collective advocacy. Yet systematic inequities paint a different picture. For instance, Black Americans still face disproportionate rates of poverty, incarceration, and health disparities. Who else but Black leaders, people deeply connected to these lived experiences, can effectively champion solutions? At the same time, it's fair to question whether the traditional model of Black leadership is suited to tackle today's challenges. The decline of DEI and affirmative action might not just demand new leadership, but a reimagining of leadership itself. Here's a thought to consider. Are we holding on to the idea of Black leadership because it's familiar, or is it genuinely the most effective tool for progress in 2024 and beyond? Are DEI and affirmative action ineffective by design, or have they been sabotaged by those who never believed in them to begin with? Do we still need Black leadership, or is it time to imagine a different way forward? Stick with us as we continue this deep dive into what leadership, or the absence of it, means for Black America today. Several policies and programs have historically been associated with advancing Black leadership and addressing systematic inequalities. These initiatives range from government programs to grassroots efforts aimed at fostering leadership development, improving representation, and empowering Black communities. Here are a few examples. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, a landmark policy that addressed racial discrimination in voting, particularly in the South. While not exclusively about Black leadership, it allowed for greater political participation, paving the way for Black leaders to gain elected office. Efforts to expand voter access, such as automatic voter registration and voting rights restoration, also support Black leadership. Black leadership training programs like the National Urban League's Emerging Leaders Program and the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's Leadership Institute focused on training the next generation of Black leaders in public policy, nonprofit management, and business. Policies like the Future Act, which provides funding to HBCUs and minority-serving institutions, ensure these schools can continue their mission. The Community Reinvestment Act, or CRA, this policy encourages banks to meet the credit needs of low and moderate income communities, including predominantly Black neighborhoods. While not explicitly about leadership, the CRA empowers economic leadership and investment in underserved areas. And then we have the Black Lives Matter movement, and the policy demands the BLM movement has influenced around police reform, education, equity, housing, and health disparities. The movement also highlights the role of decentralized community-driven leadership as a modern model of Black advocacy. Civic engagement initiative programs like My Brother's Keeper, launched by President Obama, aim to address the opportunity gaps facing young men of color and encourage them to assume leadership roles in their communities. Affirmative procurement policies, which are initiatives requiring government agencies and large corporations to allocate a percentage of contracts to minority-owned businesses, have helped support entrepreneurs and leadership in economic sectors. Some states have implemented targeted policies like reparation programs, or funding for business accelerators and community development funds. The 100 Black Men of America, this not-for-profit focuses on mentorship, education, and leadership development for young Black men. And then we have policies encouraging mentorship programs for Black youth. They've been instrumental in fostering future leadership. These policies and programs illustrate the multifaceted approach to fostering Black leadership, addressing economic, political, educational, and community challenges. However, the effectiveness of these efforts often depend on sustained advocacy, funding, and public accountability. The effectiveness of policies aimed at fostering Black leadership has been mixed, with notable success as well as persistent challenges. Let's break down the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 enabled the election of Black leaders at all levels of government, increasing political representation. By 2024, there are over 10,000 Black elected officials in the U.S., compared to fewer than 500 in 1965. It facilitated key victories such as the election of the first Black president, Barack Obama, and a record number of women in Congress, Black women in Congress. Some of the challenges are that recent voter suppression tactics such as the strict ID laws and gerrymandering have eroded some of the progress made under the act. The Supreme Court's 2013 Shelby v. Holder decision weakened its enforcement of disproportionately affecting black voters, but also black leadership training programs like the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's Leadership Institute have trained hundreds of black professionals who now influence policy, business, and activism. Alumni often credit these programs with opening doors to higher levels of opportunities. But some of the challenges are that they have limited funding and access that restrict the number of participants. And then let's not forget about the Small Business Administration and the MBDA that's helped black-owned businesses increase by nearly 40% between 2017 and 2022, with many benefiting from SBA loans and resources. And then programs like the Opportunity Zones have redirected investments to underserved communities, some of which are predominantly black. But then some of the challenges are that black businesses still receive less than 2% of SBA loan funding annually, despite constituting a significant share of entrepreneurs. Systematic barriers like lack of generational wealth continue to hinder economic empowerment. HBCUs produce 20% of black graduates despite representing only 3% of U.S. colleges. They have nurtured leaders in politics, business, and activism, including Kamala Harris, Stacey Abrams, and Martin Luther King Jr. Many HBCUs face chronic underfunding compared to predominantly white institutions. Federal and state funding increases have been inconsistent, limiting long-term sustainability. And then also we have the Community Reinvestment Act. This act directed billions in loans to low-income black neighborhoods, fostering small business growth and home ownership. Some of the challenges are that critics argue that banks often sidestep accountability by meeting quotas without meaningful community impact. And then, of course, the Black Lives Matter movement, which raised global awareness and systematic racism about police brutality, influencing legislation like police accountability laws in several states. BLM inspired a new wave of decentralized leadership that reflects community-driven priorities. But some of the challenges are policy demands, such as defunding the police. They face political resistance and public misrepresentation. Civic engagement initiatives such as My Brother's Keeper help to reduce suspension rates and improve graduation rates among black boys in participating districts. Critics argue that the initiative focuses on individual outcomes rather than systematic change. And then affirmative procurement policies increased opportunities for black-owned businesses to win government contracts. But some of those challenges are black-owned businesses often lack the resources to compete with larger, more established firms. While many policies and initiatives have fostered significant progress in black leadership, programs like HBCU support and leadership training have shown measurable success. But broader systematic issues such as economic disparities and institutional racism remain hurdles. The effectiveness of these policies often depends on sustained advocacy and accountability. Grassroots leadership has played a critical role in addressing systematic challenges, fostering resilience and driving change from the bottom up. Grassroots leaders often live in the communities they serve, making them intimately familiar with the challenges and strengths of their neighborhoods. They empower individuals and groups by organizing efforts around shared goals, fostering a sense of agency and ownership. Grassroots movements can quickly adapt to changing circumstances, addressing immediate needs such as housing, food security, or crisis intervention. Grassroots leaders like Fannie Lou Hamer and organizations such as the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee organize voter registration drives, sit-ins, and marches. Local churches and community centers acted as hubs for organizing and strategy. Modern movements, such as BLM, began as grassroots response to police brutality and systematic racism. But without a central figurehead, it grew into a global movement powered by local chapters and activists. The movement has influenced policies like police reforms and raised awareness about racial disparities. Groups like the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative in Boston have tackled issues like gentrification and displacement. And then youth engagement programs like Detroit's Leaders of Tomorrow or the Harlem Children's Zone invest in youth through mentorship, education, and leadership training, creating a generation of changemakers. However, grassroots organizations often operate with minimal funding, relying on donations or grants that can be inconsistent. And then those leaders have burnout, and volunteers can face emotional and physical exhaustion, especially when dealing with systematic barriers that are slow to change. And then we have political resistance. But then those grassroots movements often challenge entrenched power structures. This leads to a pushback from local governments or larger institutions. So here's some examples of grassroots leadership today. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Black-led mutual aid networks provided food, healthcare, and financial support to underserved communities. Violence interruption programs like Cure Violence and Advance Peace work within Black neighborhoods to reduce gun violence through mediation and community building initiatives. And then we have economic empowerment initiatives. Organizations like these, such as the Black Futures Lab, focus on mobilizing political power and investing in economic self-sufficiency at the community level. These grassroots efforts often serve as incubators for policies and strategies that later influence national conversations, such as criminal justice reform or affordable housing initiatives. The future of grassroots leadership will continue to be vital as systematic issues like economic inequality, environmental racism, and educational disparities persist. Its adaptability, community focus, and ability to mobilize at the local level ensure it remains a powerful tool for change in Black communities. Investing in grassroots leadership through funding, training, and resources can amplify its impact and address the systematic barriers that Black communities face today. The current state of Black America reflects a mixed reality, showing significant progress in some areas, but persistent challenges in others. So when it comes to progress through education, the high school dropout rate for Black students has declined dramatically from 13.1% in 2000 to 3.9% in 2024. Black women also outpace both Black and white men in college enrollment. College enrollment among Black men is approaching parity with white men, with a gap of only 2.4 percentage points. And their health and age-adjusted death rates have improved as well. Civic engagement and health metrics such as voter registration and access to health care have been seen as notable improvements. And then we have the unemployment rate. These rates have dropped 5.3% in 2024, though still higher than white unemployment at 3.4%. And that's great to hear, but Black Americans earn on average only 64% of the income of white Americans, with the racial income gap remaining stagnant for over 20 years. The wealth gap remains wide, with Black households averaging about 64% of white households' wealth, and Black home ownership rates decreasing since the year 2000. And then we have poverty in housing. Many Black communities continue to experience concentrated poverty and systematic barriers to home ownership. And let's not forget about violence and crime. Systematic issues like poverty, unemployment, and lack of economic opportunities continue to be contributing factors to crime in underserved Black communities. Grassroots community leadership and policy changes have led to pockets of improvement, but systematic issues such as economic disparity and unequal access to resources continue to affect the overall trajectory. Initiatives like improving education and civic engagement show promise, but addressing deeply rooted economic and social injustice inequities is crucial for long-term change. Leadership is not just about titles or positions, it's about courage, vision, and the unwavering commitment to creating a better future. Today on Club Geneva, we've explored the state of Black America and the critical role of leadership and what it plays in shaping our trajectory. It's clear that while we've seen progress, systematic challenges persist, and overcoming them requires leaders who are bold enough to disrupt the status quo and innovative enough to build something new. But leadership isn't just the responsibility of elected officials, CEOs, or movement leaders. It's personal. It starts in our homes, our communities, and our circles of influence. It's in the parent advocating for better schools, the neighbor creating a safe space for dialogue, and the young activist challenging outdated systems. Leadership at its core is a decision, a choice to act, even when it's uncomfortable or uncertain. So as we conclude this episode of Club Geneva, I'll leave you with this. What kind of leadership does our community need right now? How do we balance honoring the legacy of those who came before us while carving a future that's uniquely ours? What sacrifices are we willing to make, and what risk are we willing to take to ensure the next generation can dream bigger, achieve more, and lead with purpose? The answers to these questions aren't simple, and maybe that's the point. The greatest movements in history didn't come from easy answers. They came from difficult conversations, collective action, and the willingness to envision something greater. We encourage you to sit with these questions, discuss them with others, and most importantly, act on them. Leadership isn't about waiting for someone else to step up. It's about asking yourself, what can I do right now? Thank you for joining us on Club Geneva. We hope this conversation has inspired you, challenged you, and left you with the kind of questions that spark action. Until next time, remember the future of Black leadership isn't just a vision, it's a call to action. Have a good night.